the hormone receptor affinity. This is big time in this is really big time in therapeutic drugs. So, for example, how many of you, when you get a bug bite or any sort of dry skin, take this cortisol or this anti-itching cream? I don't do that. You're taking a hormone, glucocorticoids. But you're not taking necessarily the natural glucocorticoid. You're taking a synthetic glucocorticoid that binds to the receptor much higher affinity than the natural one. So it works better. And that's one of the reasons why these things work. It also has less side effects than the natural one. So the affinity of the hormone to the receptor dictates the response. And the other thing that dictates the response is how the receptor interacts with the various cell components. So how well does a steroid receptor bind DNA? How well does a protein hormone receptor kick on various responses? And as you can imagine, and if you look at all the various diseases out there, you have very selective defects in all of these pathways. These are not trivial issues from a physiological standpoint. A single base mutation on a piece of DNA, a single base, we have like 2 or 3 billion base pairs of DNA, single base pair mutation can mean the difference between viability or not in terms of these interactions. It can mean the difference on what your lifestyle looks like or not. We'll talk about a specific example of that. Probably not today, we'll hit that one on Friday. Okay? So the point is, these are not, even though this is a molecular cellular issue, these have very dramatic effects physiologically. Questions? Okay, so one of the things that these, about these hormones is there's some issue of where do they come from? And you have a classical and non-classical definition. A lot of these, how the whole field started is they come from what's called endocrine glands. And from precursors, they actually make the hormone, puts it out into the bloodstream, and in a target tissue, target cell, which has a receptor, it binds, you get a change, and you get a response. And this is called the endocrine pathway. Classic definition. A lot of these endocrine glands, sometimes the cells are all clustered together in a specific gland, such as the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary, which we'll talk a lot about. Sometimes these cells are interdispersed in other tissue, such as the ovary, the testes, and the beta and alpha islet cells of the pancreas, which we'll talk a lot about over the next bit of time. But those are all considered endocrine glands nonetheless. In addition, it is well known that these hormones don't necessarily have to go through the blood stream or necessarily come from endocrine glands. So if you look at cells in a tissue, this cell here has a receptor, and many times it can react to a hormone that's secreted by neighboring cells. Another example is the synapse that we just talked about, where these neurotransmitters come out, bind to receptors in the effector cell. So the hormones or hormone-like molecules are not coming from the bloodstream, they're coming from the neighboring cells. And this is called paracrete. In addition, some cells can make their own hormones and respond to them. Classic example is cancer cells. Once a cancer cell starts losing its growth regulation, many times the cell itself can make the hormone and then have it respond to the receptor in the same cell. And this is called autocrine. And this is a big issue. Once a cancer cell gets rolling, sometimes it's hard to stop that. So a lot of the cancer drugs don't necessarily look at hormone areas, try to stop this, but they try to stop how the receptor signals its change into the cell. And a lot of the drugs are based on that and these kinds of interactions with the receptor, not so much on the hormone. So the point is, hormones do not all go through the blood. And sometimes the same hormone that goes from an endocrine system is the same one, molecularly, as is a paracrine, as is an autocrine. The receptors can be the same. Okay, so we're going to take I consider not so much we're going to take the non-classical, or I should say the correct point of view, and we're going to look at it from the standpoint of the receptor, and in terms of how these things work. But physiologically, where the hormone is produced, how it's produced, how much it's produced, when it's produced, is all very important. Questions on that? Because we're going to take this on a slightly more physiological level for a moment. Yes? Yeah, because it's next to, the cell's nearby, so it's paracrine. Right? It's just a term that you'll see in the field. Okay? All right. So, why do we have hormones? And one of the reasons, I'll just grab a piece of chalk here, if I can find it. You're trying to regulate the physiology. And what you're regulating is, let me get this up here. You're regulating what's called homeostasis. I'm sure you've heard that term on occasion, which is the steady state conditions. However, what this really is a dynamic process. That's the part you really have to appreciate here. That this process is dynamic and responds to stimuli constantly. Okay, you're sitting there in your homeostatic state, but you're actually responding to lots of stuff. You're listening to words, you're under a light, you're sitting, you're writing, so forth, texting somebody in Boston or something like that. You're doing a lot of interesting stuff. But you are on your homeostasis. So how you respond to this is through feedback mechanisms. This is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time today. Okay, I'll leave this. So one of the feedback systems is negative feedback. And I hate the term on this, and you'll see why. The role of negative feedback is to keep your system constant, is an attempt to keep it constant, even though the term negative feedback. The reason why it's given this term is you have a change in a variable. We'll see how this works in a second. Change in a variable, whatever that is, a variable, causes the reverse of the change. Okay? See what that means. Seems a little bit of a tongue twister there. Change in a variable stimulates the reverse of the change. So what I refer to that is, at a biological level, when you say constant, at a biological level, you're actually talking about minor changes within a ceiling and a basement. You want to keep it within a range. So for example, if you look at X, here's your physiological range you want to stay in. If you keep a molecule anywhere in this range, from a physiological standpoint, that is considered constant. So if you have a low amount of X, so this is X, you have low X, then you start triggering the increase in X, and when you get to the upper end of this variable, you trigger the loss of X. It comes back down, then you trigger more X, and it goes back and forth. So negative feedback keeps molecules in a constant range, but constant in this case means too high, too low, make more, too high, make less, too low, make more. Got that? That's what you mean by constant in a biological sense. And we're going to talk a lot about negative feedback, certainly in human reproduction and in the stress response. And what we're going to talk about is this one axis You have a hypothalamus, which produces various hormones or releasing factors. Why don't we just get right to the stress response? Might be the easiest way to deal with this. So you have the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and this axis is involved in a lot of regulation. You'll see this several ways in human reproduction. You'll see it now in stress. And this goes to a target organ. What happens is the hypothalamus produces a releasing factor. In stress, which in this case is long-term stress, kind of like the weeks leading up to studying for your finals or something like that, you start getting run down. There's a biological stress there. You produce a hormone called CRF, which is corticotropin releasing factor. Being a self-respecting hormone, binds to a receptor in the anterior pituitary. So it binds to a receptor. The anterior pituitary then pops out a hormone called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, adrenocorticotropic hormone, based on the name, goes to the adrenal cortex. So here's the adrenal cortex. I'll give you a blow up of this in a second here. This also binds to a receptor. So hypothalamus produces a hormone called CRF, which then binds to a receptor in the anterior pituitary, which causes it to produce another hormone called ACTH, which then binds to a cell surface receptor in the adrenal cortex. And in the adrenal cortex, we'll do this over here because this is straightforward stuff. In the adrenal cortex, so ACTH comes in, causes a change and a response in the cell. So the response in the adrenal cortex is to convert cholesterol into cortisol, which is a glucocorticoid. Okay? Forms glucocorticoids. The cortisol then comes out and has various tissue effects, such as increase in glucose uptake, metabolic changes, and so forth, anti-inflammatory effects, things of that sort. But in addition, you don't want to make too much glucocorticoids. Okay? If you make too much of it, it's not good. And so there's a negative feedback system. So the cortisol that comes out has a negative feedback on the hypothalamus. The glucocorticoids have a negative feedback. So let's look at this overall system. You have this long-term stress. You've been studying for weeks and weeks and weeks. You're feeling a bit run down, or you've got some sort of biological stress going on. Your hypothalamus makes CRF over this long time frame. Binds to the receptors in the anterior pituitary, produce ACTH. ACTH, in its receptors, goes in the adrenal cortex and you make cortisol. Cortisol has all this tissue effects, anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting effects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't want too much glucocorticoids in your body. So when you have too high of a level, you turn down the production of ACTH and you turn down the production of CRF. So you bring the glucocorticoids back down. When it's too low, this part of the negative part of the feedback no longer works. And now you produce more CRF and more ACTH and more glucocorticoids. So the bottom line is that during the course of this stress, high levels of glucocorticoids, you make too much, it comes back down. It goes down to some level. CRF and ACTH starts working again. You bring it back up. It gets too high. You shut down ACTH. CRF comes back down. Does everybody see that? Questions? Does everybody see how negative feedback allows for biological constancy? Yes, on the right. Well, can you increase it? The answer is in theory, yes, but you don't want to. This is enough for your body to function. However, medicines, for example, are based on tweaking this negative feedback systems. Okay, so if you have too much glucocorticoids, you can get certain disease states. You don't want that. You get a lot of water retention. So mineralocorticoids also comes out here too. And too much of this, you'll start retaining water like crazy. Okay, yes, good question. This one right here. Here, you're talking about here and here? Yeah, it happens simultaneously. It's like when you park your car. You put your car in park and use the parking brake on. At least you should when you park your car. I always tease my daughter about not necessarily like getting that parking brake in after she does that. I can hear. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's thought to happen fairly simultaneously, but you got to cut them both down. Yeah, it can happen because you're making glucocorticoids in the system, so they react about the same. I don't know if you have to shut off one versus the other, if there's an order to it. I think it's both happening. It actually slows it down. You don't shut it off completely. Then you come back up. But the point is, negative feedback system wants to keep consistency. Okay? So this is in contrast to positive feedback, which we'll do in the last 5 minutes. Positive feedback. And you'll see this in human reproduction. Here, the change amplifies the change. In contrast to negative feedback, where you're keeping a consistency, here, the idea of positive feedback is to amplify the change. And probably the best example, you'll see a good example of estrogen in female human reproduction next week, of positive positive feedback. But the best example is labor. So here's a baby coming down the birth canal. And we'll give him a little smile. He's coming down with a little smile. And I have 4 kids. Trust me, they don't come out with smiles. So what happens is you have the pressure of the head of the baby coming down the birth canal causes contractions. And actually what it causes is the production of a hormone called oxytocin, which we'll talk a lot about next week at some point. So there's a positive effect. The contractions create more pressure. More pressure creates more contractions. More contractions creates more pressure. More pressure creates more contractions. Talk to your moms about that. And then the baby's born, and you're back down to baseline. So it's a classic example of positive feedback. The more pressure, the more contractions, the more contractions, the more pressure, until the biological situation is resolved. You'll see the same thing with high levels of estrogen in human reproduction, the female part of the menstrual cycle. Okay? Does everybody see the difference? Positive feedback is not maintaining consistency. It is the opposite. You are changing the situation. Negative feedback, the idea is consistency within a biological range. And you'll see this hypothalamus anterior pituitary system throughout human reproduction. You have to understand that, to have some understanding of human reproduction. Questions? Now, some systems, we've got about a minute here, or 2 minutes. Some systems have no feedback. An example is the stress again, but this time rapid stress, or short-term stress. For example, you walk into your exam. How many of you, your heart beats a little bit faster in that few seconds or moments before you get the exam? Right? At least mine used to anyway. Okay. Now I get that when I write the questions, but that's a different issue. So this rapid stress, that's the hypothalamus. Through nerves connection, which is very quick, you go to the spinal cord. and then through nerves again. Instead of the adrenal cortex, you go to the adrenal medulla, which is inside the cortex. Okay, so here's the medulla, here's the cortex on the outside. And the nerve endings go right into the medulla, and you convert tyrosine, which is an amino acid, to a couple steps into epinephrine, which happens very quickly. And epinephrine goes out into the system. What does epinephrine do? Increase the metabolic rate, your heart beats a little more, glucose uptake, but also what I like about it is you get this mental alertness. You get a clarity sometimes, because you're so rapidly, your system is so geared up for motivation here, and high metabolic rate. So when you go to exam, and your heartbeat starts a little bit, try to embrace the stress. And all you're doing is creating epinephrine, and allow the mental clarity to help you out. And some people can see that. This also responds to the fight or flight mechanism too, or part of it. You're walking across the street and you see a truck barreling down on you. You don't just stand there, right? You get out of the way as quickly as possible. It's that instant recognition, and that's what's going on here. Yes? There's probably more to it than that, because this isn't the only thing that's going on, but it could be related to that. Or maybe you can't handle the high levels of epinephrine. I've always liked epinephrine, personally. It's a good thing sometimes. But anyway, that's a rabbit trail. There's no feedback, particularly in this kind of system. Okay, we'll see you guys on Friday.